A defining moment in my life. Um, I think the biggest one happened when Holly and we had just been married a couple years. Um, Jackson was very young, and he had some health issues, very sick as a child, and it was a lot of concern. And what happened was, on the top of your lungs you have two valves, and those valves, when you breathe and your heartbeat, they open and close. So you can breathe oxygen and then exhale and inhale, exhale, all that. Well, what was happening was one of the valves of his lungs stayed open all the time; it would not close, and the other valve was partially closed. But what happens when that takes place is fluid gets into your lungs, which causes asthma. It causes issues with breathing. It causes pneumonia. Very easy to get sick. Just lots of health issues that come with that. And as a baby, Jackson, he would be playing on the floor and would crawl. In the living room, he would crawl 10 feet, and he would stop, and he would turn blue because he couldn't get air. Those valves weren't closing. He couldn't breathe. You just, as a parent, it just scared you half to death, and very sick. And the doctors, when we find out what was wrong with the valves and the lungs and all that, the doctors said that he would never play sports. He can't do it. He can't breathe. It might come to the point where he was on a breathing machine. He would have to have oxygen, the little oxygen tank to breathe. He's not going to be active. He won't be able to play sports. He won't be able to run around. You're going to have to watch him like a hawk, because it could, essentially, it's your lungs. It could kill you if you're not careful. Well, he we watched him for a few months, and we just, as parents, we didn't know what to do. He was in the hospital, oh goodness, probably 2 or 3 times a month, at least, for a while. And with that comes medical bills, and we were fairly newlyweds. We've been married a couple years, but we weren't rich by any means. We weren't rolling in the dough, but that comes medical bills. It comes with having to take time off of work because your kid's in the hospital, and just his health was our priority, and we didn't know what to do. There were times where we didn't know if we were going to make the next paycheck or make the next rent. We were just barely making it. We didn't know how Jackson was going to respond. We didn't know what was going to happen with him. So it was a very, very trying time. And like I said, we were 24 years old. We were still very young. First kid, had no clue what we were doing. We were just trying to wing it. And so lots of stress. Well, on a Sunday night, at the POA, the Pentecostals of Alexandria, the Sunday night before, because of the times, they always do a healing service. And that Sunday night, he was in the nursery, we were in service, and we went down to the altar for special prayer. Pastor Anthony had said, if you have any special requests, if there's anything that there's special needs, come down, we're going to pray for you. So Holly and I went down to the front, and we were standing in for Jackson. We needed a miracle in his life, and so we got down there, and Sister Vesta Mangan, she comes down there, and in the way that only Sister Vesta could, she says, "Hey, doll, where's that baby?" And Holly said, "Well, he's in the nursery." She said, "You go get him." And we just kind of looked at her at first, and we said, "Well, we're going to stand in for him." She said, "No, you go get that baby." And so we stood there. I stood there. Sister Vesta stood there. Holly ran to get Jackson and came back. And Sister Vesta was still there. She never left. And so they began to pray for him. And he had a doctor's appointment later that week down in New Orleans to check his status of everything. And so they prayed for him. Powerful prayer went forth. Sister Mickey Mangan came and prayed. Vesta was there. Pastor Anthony was there. They just powerful time of prayer. Well, during this as well, a lot of people don't know, but Holly was deaf in her left ear, I think it was. and because of a sickness when she was a kid, just the hearing never came back. So she could hear fine out of one ear, but one ear she was deaf. And during that time of prayer, we weren't even praying for Holly. We were just worried about Jackson. And I think it was Sister Mickey came up to her and grabbed her, kind of around the head and whispered into the other ear. And she was whispering in the ear that Holly was deaf in, and God opened it, and she could hear Sister Mickey praying and speaking to her in that ear. So that was the first miracle. That was a miracle. Well, later that week, Jackson went down to New Orleans. Holly took him. I think my mom was with her. I was having to stay in Alexandria and work. And the doctor ran tests, did all the MRIs, whatever they were doing. I mean, it was test after test after test. Well, he came back and he said, I don't know what happened. He said, I don't know what changed from 3 weeks ago when we did these tests to now. He said, but now the valves in his lungs are opening and closing like nothing was ever wrong. He said they're not bothering him. He said his lung capacity is normal. His valves on those lungs are working perfectly. And since that day, Jackson has never had any issues with his lungs. He plays every sport imaginable. If it's a ball, if it's a sport, he plays it. He is active. He runs, he rides his bike, he wrestles, he shoots ball, plays baseball, plays football, plays soccer, he swims. He does all of these things that the doctor said he wasn't going to be able to do. And that was a defining moment in my young life, I know, and especially for me and as a couple, my wife and I. That was a defining moment of really having to trust and rely on God, because we did not have the answers. We did not know what to do. We had no clue. All we knew was to trust in God, pray, fast, and say, God, it's in your hands. And he took care of it. And that was a huge, huge defining moment in my life of really having to learn to trust and rely on God, because it will work out. Everything will work out for his plan. And I'm so thankful for what he did in Jackson's life and in our life. That was a big defining moment.